Chapter 8. Changing Elements. Refining designs usually requires manipulating elements after they've been created. This chapter discusses manipulation and modification tools provided in MicroStation. Topics covered include identifying elements, selecting elements, manipulating elements, modifying elements, and deleting elements. Many times MicroStation users are not called on to create new designs but edit existing ones. The user needs tools that allow manipulation and modification of existing geometry. MicroStation provides many tools dedicated to changing existing graphic elements. Many of the operations performed in the design rely on the ability to identify existing elements, or to pick specific points on those elements. MicroStation provides the tools to perform these tasks. Elements or key points on elements can be quickly and conveniently identified using tentative snap points and data points. We discussed this a lot in the last chapter with drawing with precision, and I'd like to go into a few other things, but we discussed the AccuSnap as well as tentative snap and the difference between automatically snapping to points, how to locate those points, how to change the snap settings so that it finds those points. We will be talking more about element information and identification in the next chapter, but I'd like to go over just briefly the selection tools that we have. This is the tool settings dialog. I have selected the element selection tool. You'll notice it's a rather robust dialog. It used to be that there were two separate selection tools in MicroStation. There is a selection or an element selector tool and then the power selector. And you could choose which one was going to be the default tool. That's under the user preferences. And by default, the regular selector was the tool in question that was the default tool. And it wasn't a very robust tool. It was literally just a tool that you could select elements with. As a result, there was the Select by Attributes dialog, which is accessible from the Edit menu under Select by Attributes. This is sort of a element search tool. You can select levels, element type, specify color, weight, and line style, and then hit execute, and it'll create a selection set, or it will rather select multiple elements, called a selection set, based on those criteria. And it's a perfectly good dialog, and it still works, and you can use it, but there's nothing in the Select by Attributes dialog that can't also be done by the element selection tool now. They've replaced the original element selector and the power selector with what is essentially the power selector, and it's called the element selection tool. And you see this dialog here. Sometimes it might look like this, but you can fly it down with the little down arrow. And you have all these different search criteria. You can select by a specific level and then narrow down your selection based on color, weight, and line style, element type, and of course there are many more tabs that are available. If you right click, you can see there are other tabs that you can activate to specify criteria by which to select. In addition to that, there's different ways to select. You can select individual elements, you can draw a block around them, you can draw a shape around the elements to select them, you can draw a circle, and you can strike a line across elements to select them. The element selection tool also provides a number of toggles for selecting new elements only, adding elements continuously to the element selection set, removing elements from the selection set, inverting the selection set, and then there's a select all, which then of course turns into a select none after everything has been selected. We'll talk more about the element selection tool in the next chapter, but I wanted you to be aware of the element selection tool because we do use it in this chapter. So I won't be talking about the select by elements dialog because it is sort of antiquated at this point. You can still use it, and it's a little bit intuitive on how to use it. You can just select based on search criteria, but I don't think that it's necessary to learn about the Select by Attributes dialog because the element selector tool has replaced its functionality. We're going to be talking about the Manipulate task, which is the Manipulate toolbox. It is available from the main task up here. If you press on the copy icon, you can then open Manipulate Classic as a toolbox. As with all the toolboxes, it is available from the toolbox dialog, which we discussed in a previous chapter. So what tools do we have available in the Manipulate toolbox? We have Copy Element, which copies elements, Move Element, which moves elements, Move Parallel, which is similar to Move, except it will scale an element so that it is parallel to the element from which it was moved. This sounds a little confusing, but we'll discuss this and demonstrate it in the exercise. There's Move to Contact, which moves an element in a defined direction until it contacts an existing element. There's Scale Element, which resizes an element based on scale factor or based on points. Rotate, which rotates elements. That can be based on an active angle or based on points. Mirror, which flips an element, whether that's across a vertical line, a horizontal line, or a user-defined line. There's Array Elements, which copies an element multiple times to create a rectangular or polar array. Align Elements by Edge, which aligns elements to the edge of another element, so you can line things up. And Stretch Element, which, sort of self-descriptive, it stretches elements. Let's find some stuff to use these tools on. We're in the topo file right now. This is not an exercise. This is just a demonstration. I'm going to just kind of run through some stuff. In fact, I'm going to draw some elements. Just draw some lines real quick. So Copy Element. You can select a key point, snap point on the element, and then notice how AccuDraw is active. So if you want to copy an element 5 feet, you can enter 5 into the X. See the X field down there? And you can lock that axis too. Oops, I did not lock the axis. Now, there the axis is locked. Okay? That's Copy Element. Now, interesting thing about the Copy Element tool. You can select the Copy Element tool first, select your key point, and then copy your element, right? You can also use the element selector to select your element first, then activate the tool, and then select a key point on the element. So there's a number of ways you can do this, and this is the same for a lot of the Manipulate tools in MicroStation. The Move Element does the exact same thing and works the exact same way as the Copy Element tool, except of course it does not make a copy, it just simply moves the element. You move the element based on key points. You snap to a point and then move the element. You can, of course, just snap to an arbitrary point on the element, but AccuSnap works with that in AccuDraw, so you can copy. Here's the copy parallel, and this is how I'll demonstrate it. You can copy or move parallel. So move parallel, you see it's modifying the element so that it's parallel, as opposed to just moving it. For example, if I use the Move tool, it doesn't change the element at all. But you see how that's scaling it. And it's easier to see when I have the Make Copy option. So it used to be that the Copy and Move tools were the same tool. You just unchecked a box as to whether you can make a copy. The Copy Parallel and Move Parallel tool now still function that way. You notice it says Move Parallel, and then I check the box for copy. It says Copy Parallel. And so you can make, concentric copies. It's absolutely excellent for making tile designs for floors. Okay. So that is the Copy Parallel and Move Parallel tools. What I just did there is I used the element selector and the line to strike across all those elements. I can get rid of those because we're moving on. I'm moving on to scale, and we did create this nice little building here. So let's use this as the element I demonstrate on. Scaling an element can be done a couple of ways. You can set it for active scale. Here's the tool settings dialog. Active scale. My active scale I'll set for 10. So I'm making this 10 times larger. And you see I've snapped to a point, so you can align it to that point, or you can select About Element Center, and it's going to scale around the center. Okay, so you can either select to snap to a point or around the element center. Another option is the 3-point scaling. And the way this works is you select the element, you enter the origin point. Again, that's the point you're going to scale from. So we had been scaling from this, so that's a good idea. Let's scale from there. And then it says enter reference point, and then allows you to scale from that point. Now, I don't have proportional checked. If I check proportional, you'll notice I'm getting a proportional scale. And all I'm doing is I'm scaling based on the distance from this point to this point. And that's the 3-point method of scaling. And that's the scale tool. You can select to make copies, and it will make copies as you scale things. Rotate tool has 3 options. I'll demonstrate those. The active angle is based on whatever angle you set in this dialog. It does rotate it based on that origin point, whatever point you select, or if you select About Element Center, it'll rotate it by the active angle around the center of the element. 2-point rotation, the first thing you do is select the element you're going to move, and then select a point. And it just provides you with a point. Right now I'm rotating about element center. It just provides you a point from which to rotate. If I uncheck that, you'll see that it is rotating based on the point that I selected, the initial point. The 3-point method works this way. You select one point, and then it gives you this line. So you can draw your own line to rotate by and snap to another point. So if you had points that you wanted to line up, say there's a reference point over here, I could take that corner of the building and rotate it to line up with that reference. So it's slightly different than the 2-point method. It provides you a user-definable reference point. Mirror element is this tool right here. And I mentioned before, you can mirror across a vertical line, horizontal line, or a user-defined line. So if we were mirroring vertically, you see that's the point of mirroring, is a vertical line. Horizontal, it's mirroring based on horizontal line. And then if it's a user-defined line, user-defined line, the first thing you do is select the element, enter a point for the line, and it's already on that line right now. So you're just moving that line and defining where the mirror point is. We will get into the align elements in the exercise. I think they do a great job of showing a exercise where we're mirroring elements. But of course, you can align to the top, bottom, left, right, horizontal center, vertical center, both centers. If you've done any sort of graphic design or worked with documents in Microsoft Office and lined up screen captures or other objects in your documents, this is fairly intuitive. Exercise 8.1, Manipulate Tools. We're going to open up the file topo-rd02. This file is located in your dataset under the survey folder topo-rd02. Now in this case I do not have an alignment referenced in to locate where we'll be working, but the exercise describes where we'll be working. It says we are in the area of the 7-Eleven convenience store located on the east side of this design. I'm not quite sure exactly which way east is, but simple solution. Let's go to Edit, Find and Replace, type in convenience, and hit Find. Alright, that was easy enough. There we are. We are right here at the 7-Eleven convenience store. There's a few things that I think are going to kind of get in the way of us working, so what I'd like to do is show you all an interesting tool that you can use to turn on and off levels. I mentioned this briefly before, but if you right press on the reset button and select Turn Level Off by Element from the context menu, let's turn off these trees. I think they're going to get in the way. You just click on it once and then go back to what we're doing. All right, the exercise says, from the Manipulate toolbox, click the Move Parallel icon. In the Move Copy Parallel tool settings, enter the values that I'm going to enter. All right, leaving it here. We're going to set the mode to Original. Set the distance to 1.5. So just like the Place Line tool and a number of other tools, you can go ahead and specify the distance. You can use AccuDraw with this. That's certainly a thing you can do. But you can go ahead and specify a value if you know what that value is going to be. Why not go ahead and specify that? And then check the Make Copy button. Now, of course, remember to follow the prompts in the bottom left corner of the screen in the status bar and select the Topo Miscellaneous line. That's this line right here. You see it's on the Topo Miscellaneous level. It does pop up a little tooltip to tell you what level things are on, by the way, if you hover over them. All right, we have now selected to copy parallel, and notice that it has accepted the distance of 1.5, and I can put that either on this side or this side of the element. It says move the cursor to the right, and a copy will automatically display 1.5 feet from the curb line. So there you are. It wants us to put this new line to the right. So move your cursor to the right, and it's copied there. Now you see the tool is still active, so we can copy parallel again and again and again. All right. I'm going to go ahead and hit the reset button to exit the tool. We've done that. That's copy parallel. We're going to rotate an element. Continuing on in Topo RDO2, zoom into the sign located on the north side of the 7-Eleven lot. That's this thing right here. It's labeled sign, so we know for a fact that it's a sign. Select the sign element. Oh, actually, we're supposed to select the rotation tool first. But that's the thing, is we can select the element, then select the rotation tool. It works either way. And we can enter values for rotation here. And the values we want to enter, 47 degrees, 7 minutes, and 19.2 seconds. Once you select this sign after having, and of course, about element center, sorry. Once you select this sign, since we've already specified the value of the active angle, it's going to rotate that sign. Now this is just tentative at this point. You see down in the bottom left-hand corner it says rotate element except reject selection. Enter a data point and it selects that. Okay, continuing in the 7-Eleven lot, using the view controls, window in on the area of the gas pumps. Oddly enough, the gas pumps are behind the 7-Eleven. And we're going to choose the Align Edges tool. That's that one right there. And let's do this. Let's align these two with these two. These are manhole covers. Let's align that. So let's see, what does it say? It says select a base element for alignment. So let's select the base element. That's the element we're aligning to. All right, it has selected the base element. Now select elements to align. I'm going to align that, align that, align that. Enter a data point to accept, and then reset to exit. Let's try that again with these gas pumps. Let's see, how are we going to move these around? Let's use this as the base element. And align those two there. Reset to exit. Let's use this one as the base element. Let's do to the bottom edge. There's just a slight alignment. And now let's align these to the center, the horizontal center. Whoops, I didn't exit the tool. There we are. Try that again. Now these two don't appear to be centered over each other, so let's do some vertical centering. Reset to exit. Select the base element. Yeah, those are pretty well centered. Data point to accept. Reset to exit. Data point to accept. Reset to exit. There you are. That is the Align Edges tool. The Modify Elements toolbox. The Modify Elements toolbox is accessed from the main toolbox or task navigator by locating the Modify Element tool, left press, and select Open Modify Classic as Toolbox. There are a number of tools on this toolbox, and we're going to discuss most of them. There's the Modify Element tool, which is one of the most useful tools as it can be used to modify many types of geometry. There's the Break Element or Partial Delete tool, which allows you to partially delete an element based on how it was drawn from a specific point. I'll demonstrate that. There's the Extend Line tool, which does exactly what it says and more. It can extend a line or it can reduce the length of a line. Trim to Intersection, which will either cause two elements to trim towards each other to meet at an intersection, or two intersecting elements, it will delete the ends of that intersection to make them simply meet at a single intersection. There's the Trim to Element, which does something similar to the Trim to Intersection tool, except it only affects the one element. The Trim Multiple, which allows you to trim multiple elements. The Insert Vertex, which allows you to insert a vertex into an element so you can have an additional vertex. The Delete Vertex, which does the opposite of that. Construct Circular Fillet, and that's it'll allow you to take a vertex and make a circular fillet out of it. Construct Parabolic Fillet, and Chamfer, which is like a fillet except not a fillet. And I've been told indeed it is fillet and not fillet. Although I suppose if you're not American, both of them are fillet. So the Modify Element tool, let's talk about that first. The Modify Element tool is used most often to adjust lines and line segments by moving or inserting vertices. It can also be used to change the geometry of blocks and complex shapes. This tool is used to do the following. Move a vertex or segment of a line, line string, multi-line curve, B-spline, control polygon, shape, complex chain, or complex shape. So all those elements, it can modify the vertex or modify those lines. It can be used to scale a block about the opposite vertex, modify rounded segments of complex chains, and change rounded segments of complex chains and complex shapes to sharp and vice versa. Let's just go ahead and demonstrate this. This essentially, like you grab a hold of some element and it essentially snaps to your cursor, whatever point you grab, so you can modify. This tool is particularly useful. You can just grab lines. See, that wasn't a closed shape, that was just a line string. So grabbing a vertex detaches it. Now, there's no vertex there, so grabbing that line moves it from there. It's a free-form modification tool, but what's really handy about it is if you have a cross-section, and say you're running earthwork, and you get that error message where it says the existing ground, or the proposed design is not tied to existing ground, and it allows you to do a data point to determine where that is. Well, if you select the Modify Element tool, and then hit the data point button, it's going to snap whatever non-connecting end of the proposed design is to your cursor. So you'll be able to see very clearly where that earthwork error is occurring. So the Modify Element tool is good for that. Also, if you just have a line that you want to, oh, that doesn't look right, let me move it just over here and move this corner here. It just frees up the key points and vertexes of elements and shapes so that you can modify them without constraint. And I did mention the partial delete tool. Hey, this is a great place to demonstrate partial delete. It's called break element now, but it was previously called partial delete. You can snap to a vertex and see how I'm deleting in the direction that the element was drawn. So you can just delete part of the element. That can be handy. There's options to break by point. So you see now that's two separate elements. Break by drag line. It's now broken where I dragged that line across. And break by element. So if you have an element that crosses it, for example, smart line crosses there. Break by element. It says identify cutting element, and then identify elements to cut. Enter data point to accept, and now you see that element has been broken right where that other element crossed. All right. Extend line tool. Notice that it's staying in line with the angle at which the line was drawn. So different than the modify tool, because if you use the modify tool and grab this endpoint, you could move this line any which way to extend it. But using the extend tool constrains it to the actual direction the line is going. There's also options to enter a distance. So just like that place line tool where we entered the distance a couple of chapters ago, this is one of those tools where you can specify a distance. And of course you can still use AccuDraw. So if I want to extend this 20 feet, type in 20 for AccuDraw, and bam, there we are. Trim to intersection. I don't know if we're going to be able to find anything that needs to trim to an intersection. I may have to draw some lines. Alright, let's just draw some lines. So here's two lines that do not intersect, but are clearly not parallel. Trim to intersection, bam, bam, bam. There you are. Now they intersect. Alright, I'm going to delete those using the delete tool. Draw a couple more lines. These lines definitely intersect and they cross each other. If I use the trim to intersection, you notice that it trims to intersection the two lines that I selected. Trim to element. Alright, two lines that would not intersect, or that would intersect. They are not parallel, but do not yet intersect. Trim to element. Select the element to modify. I want to trim that element. And then select the cutting element, which is not really a cutting element, it's the element to which it's going to be trimmed. Now what if we had some intersecting lines? Select the element to trim, cutting element, and you see it only modifies this one element. So it's trimming it to that element. Great. Trim multiple, that's a pretty robust tool here. So let's draw a couple of lines here, a couple lines here. I'm going to have some lines like that don't cross. Okay, bunch of lines that do and do not intersect. Let's take a look here. On the trim multiple, we have trim and extend. So it will trim the ends off elements as well as extend the elements. We've got just trim, so it'll only trim off the ends of elements. And then we have just extend. So let's look at trim and extend, because you can tell the difference between those different settings. But it says to identify the cutting element first. So this is my cutting element. And then I'm going to identify the elements to trim. And you notice in this case, it's keeping the portion of the element that I did not select. So whereas the intersection tool trims it to an intersection, this sort of trims it based on the cutting element and based on the elements you're clicking on. So it's cutting those, and it extends those. So really, if we wanted to make everything trim to this point, we'd select that as a cutting element, trim those ends, and extend those ends. Right? So, cutting element, whoops, you have to exit the tool first. There we are. Select cutting element, extend, trim, trim, extend. So there you are. That is trim multiple. Okay, so exercise 8.2. We're going to, I don't really like the exercise in the training guide, so you can follow the exercise in the training guide and do that. But I'm going to step you through a very similar exercise, a little bit more robust, I'd like to say. First thing let's do is select the Extend Line tool. Now you notice these lines right here, which are pavement marking lines in the topo file, and we are continuing in the topo RDO2 file. We are adjacent to the 7-Eleven convenience store. Let's extend the pavement asphalt lines and the curb and gutter lines so they line up with all of these pavement marking lines. So the first thing let's do is use the Extend Line tool and extend this line, and because we don't have to do an axis lock because it's essentially locked into the axis of the line, let's just snap to the top of the tallest pavement line just to make sure that all these pavement lines are the same length. And let's extend this asphalt line up to here and up to here. And just go ahead and grab all of these lines and extend them. Now, for example, if you extend one too far, you can still use the Extend Line tool to reduce the length of that line just by snapping. See that green line? Snap to that line. So the Extend tool works both ways. Oh, that one's, yeah. The line style of these, the little dashed line and the angle that it's at makes it look like they're not lined up, but I believe those are all lined up correctly now. So that is the Extend Line tool. Now, like I said, you can extend these lines a specific length. So, example, the AccuDraw dialog has the focus down at the bottom. I'm going to extend this another 10 feet. Extend this another 10 feet. And of course you can just grab and snap here. Alright, so that is the Extend Line tool. Let's do some other tools. Let's see, what can we do about making some lines go to an intersection? You know, I bet these lines aren't actually truly parallel. So let's try this. This is not part of the exercise, but just a demonstration of the tool. Select that line and that line. Yeah, sure enough, they are not parallel. They do indeed intersect at a certain point. But that's kind of silly, so let's do Edit, Undo. So now you're using the Undo tool. That's great. Okay, Partial Delete. Let's use the Partial Delete or Break Element tool. Set it for Break by 2 points. Select the point of a building you want to break. There you go. Because maybe that building isn't quite shaped like that. What about this other building? And of course, once you do that, the building is gone. You can't re-extend it back out. It does not maintain that information. What else? How about Extend to Element? Because in fact, this building is supposed to extend all the way to that green area. So find some lines to extend to other lines. So there you are. That's a basic run through of all the modification tools. I would recommend, since there are not that many exercises to demonstrate this, that you just go through the tools now that I've demonstrated them and gone through a very brief exercise and find things in this topo file to experiment with using the different settings in the tools. Moving on to the last topic in this chapter, which is deleting elements. because sometimes you just don't want elements in your file and you want to delete them. There's a couple ways of doing this. First thing is we have a delete element tool. It's located up here on the main task. You can take this and it works just like an eraser. You click on something and it disappears. That's the delete elements tool. Now, just like the other tools that you can select something with and then activate, if you select something and then simply click on the delete element tool in the task, it will activate and delete that element. So what else? There's also delete fence contents. And we haven't talked about fences just yet, but fences are semi-permanent selection sets that are based on, for the most part, a block, but they can be a shaped circle or drawn with an element. It can be based on your view, your entire file, or from flood. And we'll talk about flood a little bit later. But we've got our delete fence contents. And the fence is not just about deleting. Fences are for manipulating, but because we're talking about deleting, I'm going to show you the delete fence contents tool. So there's a number of different ways to delete the fence contents. And I talked about this briefly earlier when I talked about, I think it was something to do with AccuDraw when we talked about the fences, or drawing with precision. But there's inside, which is everything that's inside the fence. So I'm going to draw a fence. Inside, which deletes everything that's fully inside the fence. Overlap, which deletes everything that's inside the fence and anything the fence crosses. Clip, which deletes anything inside the fence and the elements that are inside the fence, the portions of the elements inside the fence that cross the fence. Then there's void, which deletes everything outside of the fence. Void overlap, which deletes everything outside of the fence and anything that crosses the fence. And then void clip, which deletes anything outside the fence and the portions outside the fence of elements that cross the fence. Complicated, right? Not so much. So here we are. Delete fence contents inside. Oops, I'm on place fence right now. So delete fence contents. Here we are. So inside, overlap, clip, void, void overlap, and void clip. So deleting everything inside. See, those things overlapped. These things that overlap did not get deleted because they're not fully inside the fence. I'm going to undo, hit Control Z, delete fence contents, overlap, deletes everything inside the fence and things that were outside the fence that crossed the fence. Undo. Delete clip. So that's going to clip the edges of anything that crosses it. See, there's a perfect little rectangle where that fence was, because anything that crossed the fence was clipped and only the portions inside the fence were deleted. And of course the void settings on delete fence contents just have that same effect except on elements outside. Now, why would you delete all the elements outside of a fence? That's a good question. So there are some situations I've run into in the past where somehow someone will draw a singular element way outside the design plane, so that when they're working on their design, if someone hits fit view, well, my design totally disappeared. Where did it go? And they won't be able to see this little element. I drew it rather large. So I'll say, well, there's your design. Let's zoom into your design. I'm not sure why everything kind of disappears when you do a fit view. I think there's something outside the design area. So here's the solution to that. Is you place a fence around what you can see as your visible design. You select delete fence contents, but you select void. That means it's going to delete everything outside the fence. If you suspect that anything is overlapping the fence and way outside the design plane, which would be really weird, you could select void overlap, but we're going to select void. All right, and we enter a data point. It defaults back to the element selector tool. We can enter a data point to make the fence go away, and then if we hit fit view, the element that was hiding way out there outside of our design is now gone. So that's a little trick for you if you ever run into that with your design not looking right when you hit fit view. There might be elements outside of it that you accidentally drew or someone else accidentally drew. So that is Chapter 8 on changing elements. The next chapter is selecting and grouping. Chapter 9, we will get into that shortly.